This week, John Strand, none other than John Strand, will be talking about IPFIX. If you don't know what IPFIX is, you've probably heard of NetFlow. IPFIX is the open source implementation of Cisco's NetFlow. So that'll be fun. You can find all kinds of interesting things, and John's going to talk about it. In the news, of course, we've got some funding rounds to talk about on this show because they hit two of security vendors that are very popular in the space and popular to talk about on the show, including Cylance and CrowdStrike just took two huge funding rounds. We'll talk about what that means. In addition to some ICS safe breach announcements, Trend Micro is getting into the DevOps game. Extra Hop is talking about something, and hopefully we can figure it out on the show, what they're actually talking about. And other vendors are going to use machine learning and AI to make your life better. We'll talk about all that and more on this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
A tiger. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. I don't know how this is going to go because Paul's not here this week, but we're just going to give it a shot.
Even if you've got experience in security, you can benefit from going to somewhere and learning about that bug again. Wearing my tactical turtleneck just for Mr. John Strand, who is on the lines via Skype. John, welcome to the program.
I'm wearing the tactical fleece as well, Paul. This is
Excellent.
A fully, completely, and utterly tactical show.
Improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your security operations with DF Labs security orchestration, automation, and response technology. Automate threat containment, orchestrate incident response, and measure operational performance with DF Labs in-command SOAR platform. Leverage your current security resources to minimize incident resolution time, maximize analyst efficiency, increase the number of incidents handled, and reduce overall risk. In-command SOAR acts as a force multiplier, enabling your security team to do more with less. Streamline the full incident response lifecycle automation process today. Keep your cybersecurity incidents under control with DF Labs. Visit dflabs.com/security weekly and request to see in-command SOAR live in action. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/security weekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome, everyone, to episode 96 of Enterprise Security Weekly. It is Wednesday, June 20th, 2018. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island on the lines via Skype. None other than the founder of Black Hills Information Security and Active Countermeasures, Mr. John Strand. What's going on, John?
Fantastic to be here, just trying to stay warm. I think we've had like 4 or 5 days of pretty much nonstop rain. So it's good to be someplace dry and talking about security with you.
Yes. And your travel schedule has slowed down, which is nice.
I'm not going anywhere until Sands Fire at the end of July. Gotcha. And then we have the DEF CON Black Hat thing, which you and I have got to come up with a plan of what the hell we're going to do there.
Yeah, you talked about a party. We hadn't planned a party. I mean, there's always a party when we're around.
Something about a pool on the top of Caesars.
That's what I was joking.
Thanks,
I'm like, John
Paul.
asked where the party was. I'm like, just tell him it's on the roof at the pool at Caesars.
All right, so we went to that one party that was up at the penthouse that
Oh
one
yeah.
year. And whenever your team is like, yeah, the pool at the top of Caesars, I was thinking, I'm like, that was a really cool penthouse. Did they have a
Did they
pool
have a
there?
pool? I don't think they did.
I can't remember. I don't think there was a pool. And they're like,
Maybe a
dude, he was
hot tub.
totally trolling you.
Maybe a hot tub. All I
Yeah.
remember is you took a sign next to the Adobe thing because like Adobe sponsored it.
Oh,
I
that's
vividly
right.
remember that.
I was hugging it and
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Different
Okay,
times.
yeah. So you were talking about Tiki Bar. I was talking about helping provide alcohol. There's going to be something. I think that we can
Something.
guarantee that there's going to be something at Black Hat and at DEF CON. But just be watching our Twitter feeds because we're probably going to do it all like guerrilla style, giving away free books and schwags and hallways and stuff.
I really, one of my ideas, John, is I want to launch this thing that I've been thinking of because we have the security network and we have the cigar show. I want to merge the two together, and I want to do this series called Cigar Conversations, which is kind of like the Hot Wing thing. But we smoke cigars and we do some pairings, and then I would ask the guest questions about security, and the security person would ask me questions about cigars. I thought that'd be pretty cool.
I think it would work if you did it cigar and or scotch.
Yeah. There'd
like
be
you would
cigar.
choose which way. Because no way in hell would I show up and smoke cigars, like smoke 10 of them. But if you had like 10 like shots of scotch, that would be
yeah. And
awesome.
I'm thinking like chocolate covered cherries, chocolate covered nuts, right? So we can
you have
do
me
the
a chocolate
scotch and the cigar, and maybe you don't do all those things, but you pick. It's a nice experience.
I like anything with chocolate on it.
You do. Yeah. See, your reaction when I said chocolate covered nuts or chocolate covered fruit. It's with a cigar and scotch.
This is the adult show.
It's a very anyway. My kids did that thing like know about daddy, and they asked what does daddy like to drink, and they both put scotch.
Yeah, those are good kids.
Yeah,
they know how Father's Day rolls. Speaking of fathers, I'm going to be bringing my oldest son Logan to DEF CON and Black Hat because I'm objectively a bad father. So he'll be hanging out for the training and the party with us as well.
That's awesome. All righty. Quick announcement. If you go to securityweekly.com/on-demand, I actually just moved the state of endpoint security up to the top on that page, so you can go there and get that. I had a nice description to it. If you want to learn about endpoint security, as well as a host of other webcasts that we have available on demand that you can consume at any time, go to securityweekly.com/on-demand. Alrighty, John. Let's talk about IPFIX.
So yeah, this is kind of based off of what Chris was writing about the other day that was talking about visibility. And I'd like to take the conversation a little bit more than just IPFIX. So we can talk about like NetFlow 5, NetFlow version 9, talk about some tools, but more importantly, why it's important for organizations to actually be ingesting and collecting that type of data, whether it's NetFlow or it's IPFIX. But let's step back and talk about what it is. Whenever you have a system that's communicating on the inside of your network, going outbound or even internally, those computer systems are going to create TCP/IP sessions. Now, some of our audience members are extremely technical. Some of them are more managerial and maybe formally technical, but just kind of re-hitting that technical component a little bit. You establish a TCP/IP session, right? And that information is actually incredibly valuable if you ever get into an incident, right? So if you have a workstation that is compromised or a server that is compromised, if you're actually collecting NetFlow data, whether it's NetFlow like 5, 9, or IPFIX data, and we'll talk about the differences here in just a little bit, it gives you visibility into what that system was doing at the time of that compromise. That can give you information about possible data exfiltration, where is the data being dumped online. It can give you information about possibly where the command and control server is, because remember, those
John,
could be two completely different things. Yeah, Paul.
You say TCP/IP, but
NetFlow
point. Is really just layer 3 IP, correct?
Yep, it'll do IP as well. So you can do UDP and just straight IP as well.
And not only is it useful for security, but it wasn't created for security. It was created basically for network troubleshooting, performance monitoring, and those types of things, which is still a very valid use case for it.
And that's interesting that you bring that up, because there's a tremendous number of tools that are useful for troubleshooting and just general network maintenance that are also very useful for security professionals. And this goes to systems administration as well. Many organizations have SCCM, which allows you to do all kinds of asset inventory for your Windows workstations. Many security teams don't even know what that is or how it's useful, but it's incredibly valuable in an incident. So that's a very good point.
Yeah. So, and I don't remember when I worked at the university, right? We had lots of conversations about NetFlow, in how we used it. And back then in 2003 or whatever, there was still lots of different formats. There's also a performance hit to your networking infrastructure, which I'm not sure how that's evolved over time either. Anytime you go to and basically what we're talking about, right, is security person, you're going to your network team and you're like, look, I need some data to analyze. I can get that data through a span port. We can make an investment in some other type of device that can be anywhere from a couple $100 to hundreds of thousands of dollars that'll help us mirror that traffic. Or, the other option is we can collect NetFlow data, and that gives us some purview. And there's pros and cons to each of those approaches, essentially.
There absolutely is, but I think at the end of the day, you want to have something, right, that gives you that level of visibility at the edge of your network, whether it's something that's aggregating IPFIX data or NetFlow data, or you're hanging something like a Bro sensor off of a span port on a network or a network tap. Then you want to have that type of visibility no matter what, because if you do get into an incident, you can now answer questions. What actually happened? Because you can actually look at the wire and say, I want to be able to identify all the traffic that was leaving from this internal system and all the outbound traffic during this particular time frame, and where did it actually go? Because as you and I both know, vast majority of organizations, when they get compromised, they maybe find out from a user complaining about their system. Maybe the system got locked out and you got hit by ransomware, or maybe an endpoint security alert from antivirus triggered and notified you that there was some kind of shenanigans going on in that computer system. But it gets very, very difficult for an organization to then answer the next question. What actually happened? And what did the attackers actually gain access to? And the vast majority of organizations don't even have that ability to go back in time and answer those questions. And that's where this whole NetFlow and IPFIX thing really kind of came into its own, and why it's important. And I think you and I would both agree, right? If you can just have Bro running, I would say Bro is better than IPFIX and NetFlow. It's going to give you a lot more visibility and resolution. It's going to allow you to pull down files. It's going to allow you to look at URLs. It's going to allow you to look at the DNS resolution that was going on. It is without question head and shoulders better to have something like a Bro sensor monitoring all of that traffic, because it gives you that resolution. But like you were just talking about a second ago, for many organizations to stand up a span port to dump all of that traffic over to another server, which is going to be an expensive server, to make sure that you have the proper network card to support it as well, that can be very, very, very daunting. And that's where the advantage of using something like NetFlow, like IPFIX, comes in so incredibly powerful, because now you can take your existing devices. Many of the firewalls out there actually support your NetFlow data. I mean, everyone from Cisco to Fprobe to Juniper, you name it, even VMware supports IPFIX and NetFlow in some form or another. And you can, instead of putting something in line or hanging it off a span port, you can just go to your networking device and say, hey, I want everything from this VLAN. I want everything from this network segment to send its traffic over there. The system is going to capture that NetFlow data and then process it, or that IPFIX data, and then it's going to process it. And you can just do that offline. And I'll talk about some tools and some techniques here in just a couple of seconds. Before I do, Paul, any other questions or comments that you would like to jump into and share?
No, go for it.
Awesome. So let's talk about some free utilities. And I really want to kind of focus on some vendors that do a fantastic job. And Paul and we have always got a soft spot in our hearts for vendors that release open source tools, and they also have commercial tools. That is just a good business model. One of the vendors out there is SolarWinds, right? SolarWinds has been around for a really long time, and they have their tool, a real-time NetFlow analyzer. So you can basically dump your NetFlow data, and it also supports IPFIX. And it'll give you information like what are the top applications, what are the top conversations. They also have a commercial tool that does a lot more in-depth analysis, but the real-time NetFlow analyzer does a fairly solid job. One of my favorites, though, for using, and this kind of goes back to, Paul, you remember NTOP?
Yeah.
Just how awesome NTOP was, and still is, right? So with NTOP, you have the ability to take a packet capture, or it can be on a span port, and it'll break down all the different protocols, and you can click on the endpoints. You can say, who's this endpoint talking to? It was been around for a long, long, long time. And just absolutely love it. We used it in a number of SANS classes over the years. It's just a fantastic tool. They have a tool that they've released called NProbe. It's a full-featured open source, gives you the capability. It does NetFlow version 5 and 9, and also IPFIX as well. And that'll give you information about overall traffic patterns, who's communicating outbound. If you're having full packet capture getting dumped to it, it'll also do DNS resolution as well. So those are just really, really cool. Now, the big one I want to spend some time talking about, though, is actually Logstash. Now, Logstash is part of Elasticsearch or elastic.co. Logstash is one of those big surprises because, when you're looking at elk stacks, the idea of an elk stack is you're going to have Logstash running. You'll dump all of your logs into Logstash. Logstash will pick up those logs, drop it into Elasticsearch, and then you can use something like Kibana for visualization and doing searching for different IP addresses, for different NetFlow connections, for different log events that'll exist. And you write your queries and you can generate a series of reports. And the cool thing about it is your elk stack is something that is free, open source. In fact, there's a great version of Elk that was released by Phil Hagen, and he calls it Soft Elk, SOF-ELK. So check that out, SOF-ELK. And the reason why I want to talk about this is we're seeing a tremendous number of organizations that are moving into Elk, right? It's actually, I think, by and large, and Paul, I'd like to get your impression on this as well. I'm seeing kind of the same types of people that are using Elk are kind of that bleeding edge early adopters that years ago were using Splunk. It kind of feels like Splunk is kind of, I don't want to say falling out because they're still massive. They're still huge. But a lot of people that want to have more direct control over the logs, what they see, the reports that they write, they seem to be gravitating towards Elk stacks. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'd put myself in that category, having used various different tools over the years, which is interesting. Back in the day, there was an open source tool, very small project called IP Audit, and that's what I actually used to use to do this level of analysis. And those tools have continued to evolve. And I don't know if it's switched from unstable or experimental into stable, but Security Onion now has that full Elk stack. And so you can put Bro, you can take in logs, and you get the Kibana interface. And I've played around with that. Tons of bells and whistles. I love it. You got to spend some time, though, like you said, writing your queries, figuring out what you want to get out of it, and then trying to configure it to do what you need. And just playing around with it, dude.
And I think that's worse.
You get lost,
that's
right?
where SoftElk came through. What's that?
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, that's a good point. But it backs up what I was about to say, which is, you get in there and you get it all running, and then you're like, wow, it does all this stuff, and you're clicking around and you're writing queries, and you realize you have to take a step back and like write up like your goals and outcomes that you want from this tool and have a project plan and then figure out how to go implement each of those. Whereas I think a lot of where the commercial tools are going that I've seen are like, yeah, we'll save you all that trouble. Like, here's something you can just drop in and immediately start getting some value out of without going through all of that, work and planning and configuration, which, I mean, to each their own. They're both perfectly valid, solutions.
They are. And I think, we've talked about this on the show a little bit, where we get into problems is where people look at open source tools and they start saying they're free. And that may not be the case. There's always a cost for a server. There's always a cost for the people that can actually run those different tools. And if I had to choose, I would choose open source and the expertise to run those tools every single time. However, the reality is there's just not enough experts running around. So you need to try to find a way that you can start enabling your more junior analysts in their day-to-day jobs.
Sure. And is it the best usage of the analyst time?
Yes.
I mean, I kind of think of it this way, John. We have those experts, or like in the Phoenix Project, the Brents of the world. What do you want them to focus on? And there's likely some open source solution that has tremendous value over the commercial tool, or your environment requires this open source version so that you can heavily customize it for you. Get your expert on that. For other things, I want to analyze NetFlow data. I want to, look at events in this way or some kind of SIM functionality. Yeah, then you might want to go acquire a commercial tool that's going to make it easy for those junior analysts to work with that stuff. That way your expert can focus on the things you really need that person to be an expert for.
And the experts are rare. I was talking with a friend of mine who is having a little bit of trouble finding a job. Like, he wants to move into pen testing, and he's very, very, very sharp, but he is not a senior like red teamer, right? So whenever you're looking at resumes, there are people out there that have better resumes than he does. He is kind of in that no man's land between junior and someone that's very, very, very senior. And it seems like organizations either want those junior people, they want lots of those junior people because they're cheap, or they want the creme de la creme. They want the absolute best possible experts that they can find, and they're willing to pay for it. But there's this area that kind of exists in between where you're making that transition to becoming an expert, and you're stepping out of being junior, and you're tired of getting paid like $75,000 a year. And a lot of organizations, they just do not want to pay for that middle area. They're happy to pay for the experts, but they're getting harder and harder to find. And like you mentioned, what do you want them to focus on?
Yeah.
Most of the experts would be more than happy to just get thrown in a lab and just say, hey, just build stuff, right? And they would do that all day long. They would just build servers, but they're not actually solving any problems in your organization. They're just playing with cool technology. So you really want those experts to be able to focus on the very, very, very difficult problems. And like you said, the commercial tools, they absolutely make it a lot easier for a more junior analyst, somebody that you haven't invested a tremendous amount of time and money in, to actually be effective. And that's really where Phil Hagen's SoftElk comes into play. A lot of those configurations are basically ready to go out of the box. And I believe this is actually the same VM that he uses for his SANS class, the network forensics class. He uses it. And that's cool. You know, sharing your VM out that you use for training with the rest of the world is just good karma all the way around. So it helps with a lot of those things, but I think people would mistakenly believe that creating an elk stack is just standing a couple of VMs up inside a VMware workstation and then you can start running analysis. There's a lot more tuning that goes into it. Like you got to actually set up the virtual machine appliance up with the proper amount of memory, CPU cores, storage associated with it. So there's a tremendous amount of work that takes to actually getting this set up. But I would encourage anybody that is getting started looking like NetFlow and IPFIX or any of that, play with the free and open source tools first. And the reason why is Paul said, I think in the middle of the segment, he said, identify your goals and objectives. And I strongly encourage people not to go into these particular projects with their goals and objectives up front, because that's trash, it's garbage, even though people will say that's the right way to do things. They're wrong, because you don't know what is possible. You don't know what the actual limitations are. So spend about 2 weeks sitting down and saying, okay, what is the state of NetFlow and IPFIX analysis? So then you get to see what it provides for you, what it does not provide for you. Then based upon that, you can say, okay, now our goals and objectives, if we're going to stand up a project, are going to be these following things based on better knowledge about what we want out of it, because we have a better understanding of a protocol like NetFlow 5 or 9 or IPFIX. So you know what it is actually capable of doing. Then you can actually set your expectations of your project a lot better. So I tune this to development
also,
real quick.
In terms of goals, John, I think it's a really great path you're going down, right? When we think about open source versus commercial, IPFIX and how we analyze it, realize your different audiences, right? And so the different audiences that might look at this data could be your security group in varying different levels of expertise, could be your networking group, same different kinds of levels, right? It could also be, your help desk or incident response, or maybe part of your SOC team that's more an operational thing. They may also, like the help desk man, need to look at it to go, oh, like there's a saturated link over there or something when this user is calling and reporting a problem. They have that as part of their dashboard. It's going to be, I believe, in my experience, a lot of work to build open source tools to give all those different audiences like exactly the view they need to collect their requirements and then build something. That's often where commercial tools, if they're good, really shine in that they've taken that into consideration. And that's often where I push vendors. And I still think we got a lot of work. There's a good trend happening now where they're realizing that people outside of security may need to interact with these tools. And there are vendors doing a great job. Logarithm, for example, Signal Sciences on the development side, right? Our sponsors, the ones we've chosen to be our sponsors. One reason we've chosen them is because we ask them those questions. And I like being able to implement a tool that can provide value across the organization like that. Realize open source, you can make it do that, sure. But it's going to be a lot of work and maintenance. And that's okay. Some people do that. I mean, I think back to our conversation with Leonard Rose. It's like, I manage like 10,000 Linux systems and I use OSSec agent, and likely he wrote all that code himself to manage and distribute and monitor and maintain that infrastructure.
And
And
how many of
again,
those people are there, right?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I mean, they're more common, I think, in the Linux world, especially.
mhm.
I mean, you're right. They're unicorns, right? I mean, I was describing it to someone. I think it was my brother-in-law. I was like, yeah, like sometimes, dude, I talk to people that have been doing Linux and Unix for more than twice as long as I have, right? Like I'm
And
maybe
that's
20 years into
frightening.
it. There are people who have 40, 50 years into it. And when I talk to them, it's such an awesome opportunity. Hal Pomerantz, right? I
Yep,
mean,
absolutely. Or
he's
Bill Stearns.
yeah, and Bill Stearns, like they've forgotten more about Linux and Unix than I've learned, and it's awesome to have those people. But like you said, John, there are varying levels of expertise. When you get in those higher levels,
Yep.
it's hard. It can be hard to find those people. But when you do, give them a lab,
Hang
keep
on
them
to them.
interested,
Hang
and
on.
give them a good project that requires that level of customization.
Absolutely. So I kind of wrap this up because we've got like 3 minutes left. Whenever you're looking at this, I think number one, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And that problem is visibility. A lot of organizations don't have enough visibility into the right areas. And your vendors already have this capability baked into them to enable you to have that level of visibility, not on a day-to-day basis, right? To run all the time. But if something does go wrong, you have the ability to go back and pull that data, but you have to collect it. So you can utilize the vendor's tools that are built into it. You can utilize tools like SoftElk or open source tools so that you can go back and start answering those questions about what actually happened on your network. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is expensive if you have the proper expertise in-house to actually allow you to develop this particular capability. You may not. And if you don't, that's really where a lot of vendors start stepping in. I mean, Paul, we've talked about some amazing, amazing companies out there that they literally will look at a vendor's product and they will sit down in a room full of all of their experts and they'll say, is it going to be cheaper in time for us to buy this? Or can we just write it? And they have the expertise to just write their own
Yeah.
tool that does what that commercial tool does. Those teams and those companies are precious unicorns. They're not normal. For the rest of us, we need to have a tool that gives us visibility, that gives us the capabilities that we need. And it could be something like SoftElk, but it could also be a commercial solution as well. So find the best one that works for you, but do start looking down that path of trying to get visibility into areas that are traditionally dark corners and networks that people ignore.
Fantastic. All right. With that, thank you, John. We're going to take a short break, come back with the enterprise security news for this week. Stay tuned.